for instance, if I'm a Canadian and I woke up tomorrow in any country in the Middle East and I needed to approach Israel on the border, I don't think that as a Canadian, I would have a problem coming up to the border and saying, I'm seeking asylum, I'm seeking help because this is what happened. I'd like to speak to the Canadian embassy, and give yourself up to those authorities, because you know you're going to be handled in a particular way that will be better than what your other options are, right? You'll be arrested, you'll be put in a holding cell, but your embassy will be notified and you're going to be processed accordingly, right? Versus you end up in you approach a border of another country where their levels of corruption are really high. You don't know what to expect. In those types of cases, you'd be looking at what kind of currency do you have to be able to kind of grease those palms or maybe get yourself across. It's going to be a collection of concepts where we can employ them, use our environment, avoid danger while we're moving to a better place. So for most people, when they think of escape and evasion, they look at like, okay, this is like a special forces unit that's been dropped, into some bad situation. Now they have to escape and evade, and they have some kind of logistical backup at home, waiting to collect them and extract them and all this sort of stuff. And there's a process for it, and they've been highly trained for this sort of thing and all that sort of thing. But for most people, 99.9% of people, it's going to be you're a civilian, you've gone on a vacation somewhere, and you've now found yourself in a position where the societal niceties have broken down to something else.
All right, and we're live. Welcome back to another Gutter Fighting Secrets Tactical Podcast. This is going to be Tactical Podcast number 28. We're here with Boris from True North Tradecraft. I'm really excited to have Boris on today. Boris is a really exciting guest to have on because he's right up our alley talking about the whole fair burn, escape and evasion, spycraft, tradecraft, espionage type of thing. Now, I'll get right into Boris's resume here. He's an ex-customs officer, CVSA. That's the Canadian Customs Border Patrol type unit there. He did time with a very special unit, unnamed unit, there with Customs and Border Patrol, Canadian Customs and Border. He also then moved to Transport Canada, Security and Emergency Preparedness Directorate, which is something that's very cool. We'll definitely get into that with him. 20 plus years with the Canadian Armed Forces Reserve. Started with light infantry unit, moved to intelligence. Currently, he works with the military police unit there for Canadian Armed Forces. He at one point founded True North Tradecraft, a Canadian-based consultation company that focuses on building resilient skills for both civilians, military, and law enforcement personnel in the areas of covert entry, counter, custody, disaster preparation, preparedness, personal protection, and tradecraft. He is author of several articles on both sides of the border, actually. A book, True North Tradecraft, Guide of Disaster Preparedness. Perfect. And available on Amazon. He's also got a website, truenorthtradecraft.ca. And I don't know, but generally speaking, I try to order these books directly from the authors on their websites just because I know Amazon can take a little bit out of the pocket. So whenever you guys are going to go and look for Boris's book, definitely try to go on his website, truenorthtradecraft.ca, not .com, .ca.
Because I'm Canadian.
And because he's Canadian. So, guys, we will definitely get into more with Boris. Now, recently he's been working on some stuff about pandemic measures, a little booklet and everything, and I'm definitely going to be asking him some questions about what he thinks here. But before we get done with the intro, you can definitely find Boris on Instagram and Facebook at True North Tradecraft. His links will all be below in the bio. On Twitter at Tradecraft. So that's Tango Tradecraft, Tradecraft. And Boris, with all that, resume out of the way, I'm so excited to have you on, man. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate the invite and being able to be here despite the pandemic ongoing, that we can still connect like this. And I think it's a really great byproduct of it.
So I want to just jump right into this with you here and kind of ask you, first and foremost, what do you think the most important thing is when it comes to kind of escape and evasion, the whole rules and concepts behind, when we want to train ourselves to become a little bit more handy in the escape and evasion area?
So I think great question, and I think one of the things we need to do before we start even addressing that question is we have to contextualize what we're actually preparing for to escape and evade from, right? So for most people, when they think of escape and evasion, they look at like, okay, this is like a special forces unit that's been dropped, into some bad situation, and now they have to escape and evade, and they have some kind of logistical backup at home, waiting to collect them and extract them and all this sort of stuff. And there's a process for it, and they've been highly trained for this sort of thing and all that sort of thing. But for most people, 99.9% of people, it's going to be you're a civilian, you've gone on a vacation somewhere, and you've now found yourself in a position where the societal niceties have broken down to some degree, and you have to get yourself to a safe place. That can also be that you're still in your home country. You just happen to be in a place where there's a civil unrest ongoing, or a natural disaster, or something where you don't have the usual utilities and social network that would usually protect you. So once we conceptualize it in the right way, that it's going to be, we're a civilian with what's legally kind of in our pocket when we're on vacation or something, how do we then switch gears to use our environment to now traverse it to get ourselves into a better position? Okay. So there's no real like hard, fast answer, like this is what you do, step 1, 2, and 3, and then you're done. It's going to be a collection of concepts where we can employ them, use our environment, avoid danger while we're moving to a better place. And that can be kind of a cyclical process that maybe you're only safe there for an hour, and then you're going to have to go through that process again. But when it comes down to what we're trying to build, and when we have workshops and stuff that focus on those skill sets, what we're looking at is being able to take the least amount that you have available in your environment, how to either procure it or modify it, use it to your advantage, and then get yourself to a better position until you finally find relative safety that can get you out of the area.
Whether that's moving to like an embassy, or
that's right.
Yeah, or maybe even could be a point where maybe you can't get to an embassy, you have to find a place to hide, maybe something like that.
That's right. Or get out of the country altogether, or the country or the city or wherever that area is that is a hazardous area. Once you're able to get to a safe place, which is either going to be an embassy or like a building or something like that you have relative safety, or it'll be completely geographically different on the other side of a border or something like that, where there are friendly forces or friendlies in general that'll be able to help you out.
Now, this is a question I have on my list, and I don't know how much you can discuss about it, but I'm just going to go ahead and ask it. When it comes to moving across a border, let's say, for example, and I'm just bringing this up because this was in a prior plan that I had when I was in the Middle East.
Okay.
Let's say, for example, you're in Jordan, right? And some crap goes down. You need to get over to Israel where it's a little more friendly. How do you go ahead and do that? When they are so well guarded, the border's guarded. I mean, is there a kind of a process that we might want to think, well, I want to go and try to talk to the border guards. What if they turn you away? That type of thing.
Again, going back to my first point about it's going to be different for everybody because of the concept or the context in which you're going to be presenting yourself, right? So are you going to be presenting yourself as an American soldier that's approaching a friendly border, right? That's been, broken away from your unit or something like that, or found lost. That's totally different from you being a national of a country that is hostile, or the border you're approaching is hostile, right? So for instance, if I'm a Canadian and I woke up tomorrow in any country in the Middle East and I needed to approach Israel on the border, I don't think that as a Canadian, I would have a problem coming up to the border and saying, I'm seeking asylum I'm seeking help because this is what happened. I'd like to speak to the Canadian Embassy, and give yourself up to those authorities, because you know you're going to be handled in a particular way that will be better than what your other options are,
Mm-hmm.
right? You'll be arrested, you'll be put in a holding cell, but your embassy will be notified and you're going to be processed accordingly, right? Versus you end up in you approach a border of another country where their levels of corruption are really high. You don't know what to expect. In those types of cases, you'd be looking at what kind of currency do you have to be able to kind of grease those palms or maybe get yourself across. You may get turned away if you don't have the kind of currency that you need to get through those border guards, right? And if it's hostile enough, maybe just seeing your passport is enough to get you either arrested or shot. So that may not be an option. You might have to look at a way to get across without being caught, possibly, right? And then traverse that country to the next friendly border, right? Or by passage. Now, again, this isn't going to be something that for 99.9% of people is a consideration, right? But you might want to consider various kinds of cash when you travel, and mini and micro gold, silver, or platinum bars. They are available through various outlets and banks, and they're like the size of a SIM card, but they are pure gold, and they're pretty universal as far as currency goes to get you around, especially those types of countries which still function, at borders where you can kind of grease the palms and get your way through. Crossing like a G8 nation border, it's going to be a very, or G20 border, it's going to be a little bit more of a professional situation there, and there's consular services and whatnot. And if that's what you're trying to get to, I'd say you're probably better off just to come into the border guards, surrendering yourself there with your passport, and letting the consular process get you out.
Now, this is something that I've thought quite a bit about myself, is traveling with kit. Now, if you're a guy like me and you, and we're maybe not me and you, but if you're a guy and you're working, you're a guy and you're not working, you're on vacation, right?
Yep.
You take your escape and evasion kit with you. Maybe you wanted to practice, maybe you wanted to be safe. Then you go ahead, you're going through customs, and you get maybe dragged in the secondary or something, and they find this little kit. What could be the drawbacks of traveling with gear like that?
So, a lot of the stuff you're probably not going to want, like, if you look at it from different perspectives, right? So in Canada, for instance, just like in the US, you have, there's like the screeners, which is like the TSA, right? And in Canada, it's called CATSA, the Canadian Air Transportation Security Agency. So they do all the screening when you're going through the metal detectors and the wanding and stuff like that. They're looking for stuff that's a threat to the airplane, okay? They don't care about, is it allowed in the country from a customs perspective, okay? Because that's not their mandate. Their mandate is to protect the aircraft, okay? So they may look at some stuff like blades, and weapon-shaped kind of things, and they will take that because it's a danger to the aircraft. But then other things, they'll be like, well, this is really innocuous, it doesn't really matter, like a friction saw, for instance, right? No, they're not going to look at that like something you can actually cause harm with, because that's not what it is, right? But it's still a useful tool from an escape standpoint. So there's that side of it. The other side of it is, from the point when you get into that screening process, your level of need for those types of tools drops dramatically because everybody's getting screened, right? So the probability of you needing like your first line tools, like a blade, like an actual knife or anything that you can stab somebody with, or in weapons and stuff like that, they drop precipitously. You shouldn't really need them, okay? Other escape tools, things like shims, things like friction saws, those they're not a danger. So you can still keep them on you, okay? So modify what you're actually taking into the cabin of the aircraft. Everything else you can check, and nobody cares because it's not available to you in the aircraft, so therefore it's not a problem. And things like pocket knives, they're not against customs regulations. They're not considered like weapons unless you're actually bringing something that is overtly like hostile as a weapon, right? Most customs agencies are going to look at it and be like, well, it was in the checked luggage. It's been declared. It's not something that's prohibited, like a butterfly knife or a switchblade. That's fine. Have a nice day, right? If it's really pretty and it's a less professional country, they'll just take it, put it in their pocket, and say that it's theirs now, right? But generally speaking, that is the differentiation between customs and aircraft security or aviation security when you go through screening, and how it applies to the tools that you're going to carry. So when I travel, I take things that are not weapons, just like tools like, friction saw, shims, that sort of things. Things that are very easy to put away, that are not threatening in any way, but also useful tools. That can stay in my pocket because it's allowed. The other side of it is that anything that I think that I might need to defend myself with, I either put it in my checked luggage, which is rare because I hardly ever travel with checked luggage, or I procure something when I get there. And that can be done in a lot of different ways, very inexpensively and very effectively too. My good friend Ace from Delta to Alpha Design, he's really, really good at doing exactly that, sourcing items in kind of in countries and areas where you don't have all the fancy gear and stuff like that, but you can go into a hardware store and kit yourself up for a few dollars just as effectively. He has a lot of modified carry methods as well for that sort of thing. So if you want more information on that, that's available too. But that would be my recommendation for that sort of thing, is that unless you absolutely have to have it, like it's a particular tool or a particular weapon, don't travel with it, right? It just procure something cheap and disposable when you arrive where you're going to be. Shouldn't cost you a lot, and it should be just as effective, especially given the amount of options you have in a regular hardware store, kind of anywhere in the world. For a few bucks, you can really have something on top of your escape tools, which you were able to carry with you anyways. Gives you a nice loadout.
Now, how about hiding our escape tools on us? Maybe we're concerned that we'll be searched by criminal entities or something like that, and we don't want them to find any of this stuff. Are there some solid locations, either on the body, on the clothing, that you could hide your escape tools?
Yeah. So the first thing with that is get rid of your your escape bracelet. Yeah, that'll go kind of first, right? Things like just into either if you want to start modifying your clothing, you can do that. But generally speaking, you're looking at things that are going to pass, the sniff test on the very first, right? So things like below your waistband, in your collar, perhaps. I'm not really fond of the watch situation where it's like into your watch, because especially if you have anything that looks anything more than like a really shitty watch, they're just going to take that too. So necklace around your waistband, cuffs of your pants, things like that. But you can also run it through some pieces of clothing. So a few stitches here, a few stitches there into accessible parts of your clothing. You can hang stuff there, and they're still accessible. And they're not going to be necessarily found in a quick pat down on the side of the street or in a car, right? Because no matter how well you hide it, eventually they're going to find it. If you're in a second location that's prepared to hold you, and they're prepared enough to go to that level, you'll eventually be found out. But it's the getting to that point that you'd want to be able to have something with you.
You bring up a really good point here, which I had on my list as well. When do we want to try to escape? I mean, assuming that you weren't able to fight them off and they've taken you, when's the best time frame that we can start thinking about going ahead and looking for an escape?
The sooner the better. When you have a kind of the timelines loosely from that flashpoint of where they're grabbing you, putting you in a vehicle or something like that, five guys are grabbing you and taking you, you're not likely to be able to fight them off. But there's that transport phase. And if they take you from that vehicle to another place until you get to that kind of second location that's been set up to hold you for a longer period of time, the longer you're in captivity, the longer you're put through search after search after search from being moved from location to location, you have less of an opportunity because you're more tired, more injured. There's more eyes on you. You're losing things constantly by every step of the way, and you're getting farther and farther removed from a place that you could escape to safely. So the sooner the better. I'd say that the longer you end up in some level of captivity, the worse your chances are for escape. Now, that doesn't mean that in that first little window, if you see somebody that's supposed to be guarding you falls asleep or something like that, and you're able to get yourself out of restraints and run, go for it. But again, it's one of those things that we can talk about all day and theorize all day, but the person that's in that situation is going to have to make that determination for themselves, because again, we can go to hypotheticals all day long, but if they see the opportunity and they think that the risk is worth the reward, that's something for them to make that decision for.
Sure. Now, when you go ahead and escape, let's say you were able to get your way out of some cuffs, like you said, the guard fell asleep, whatever it was, you were able to get out of there. What's next? I mean, I would assume it could be a little bit confusing, like finding yourself in the middle of freaking you don't know where.
Yeah.
What should you be thinking about now?
Not being recaptured. That's I guess your primary thing. Arming yourself with something, even if it's like a brick, right, on the side of a road somewhere. Arming yourself with something and trying to establish a location, kind of where you are, right? And then putting as much time and distance between you and where you came out of, because as soon as they realize you're gone, they're going to come looking for you. So that, coupled with looking for some safe haven, if you're in Europe or something like that, your best bet is an embassy in the city. If you're in a hostile place where you stick out like a sore thumb and you're going to be found out, places like Mexico, and I'm not an expert in Mexico by any stretch, but you'd have a harder time running through that kind of place, with a handcuff on your wrist and, not attracting attention. So changing the way you look. So something like getting those restraints off you, getting into some locals' clothes, right? And blending in so that you can move without attracting undue attention. That, coupled with your safety of having some kind of weapon or something like that, because your kidnappers, they're looking for you. But what happens when you go down an alley and there's a guy who wants to mug you? Doesn't know what your story is. Well, he's going to try, and you've got nothing. So even at like a stick or, branch, piece of pipe, piece of chain, brick, broken bottle, something is better than nothing. So those would be my kind of suggestions for that. And then start moving. Just keep moving. Stay out of sight as best you can until you start to get to a place where you can blend in better and make it to a safer location.
Now, would some kind of land navigation training be really handy for guys to get if they were worried about this type of thing?
Yeah, actually. And I find that when you do and you learn wilderness survival and stuff like that, one of those cornerstones is navigation, right? So map and compass, but also how to read terrain and knowing where you are in relation to the sun and all that sort of stuff can give you an idea. Having the know-how, even when you travel, is really important to do basic navigation. So kind of where you're going and how to get there. Another part of it is that before you leave your house, you should be doing some map recon. to have an idea of where you're supposed to be going, what it's supposed to look like, and what to expect when you get there. So, for instance, if I travel down to Washington, D.C., okay, I know that my drive is going to be like 8 hours, right? And I know that when I get to my friend's house, he lives on this side of the river, and there's a bridge here, there's a bridge there, and I have a general idea of what it's going to be when I get there and what the orientation of the city is around me. So, I can, if I find myself in the city and I've looked at the map and I see, well, there's the one memorial, there's the other memorial, and the way that they fit up, well, this is where I likely am. I'm in between these landmarks, and I understand the river's over here, so I must be on this part of the city. And so you have an idea of where you are. And that's an important thing wherever you travel, to have just a basic idea of the lay of the land before you get there, so that you can orientate yourself. And as you kind of zoom out of that map and you have a kind of bigger bird's eye view, then if you end up farther away from that city or on the edges of it, you still have a clue as to kind of where in relation to things you are. Oh, I'm in the south end of the city somewhere, right? Or the city is like, I can see the lights up there, so it must be north of me, whatever the case is. And once you have that, at least that's something that you can work with, versus you're like, I don't know what's north, what's south, east, west, up, down, I have no clue. So having more information is better than having less.
Now, how about these other things? And again, I don't know how much you can go into here, but how about these other things about Tradecraft, such as like establishing a cover story and stuff like that? Would that be at all relevant for guys traveling, or even just dealing with an SHTF type situation?
Again, it's more of a thing for people who are doing like official business of that nature, right? Your average person is not going to have a built up cover identity, right? Because it's going to be easily found out. Oh, look at this. You have here's your McLovin Hawaii, fake ID, right? And you pass that off. Well, it's not, you can't really go that deep with the average person, right? Like, again, 99.9% of people are not going to be dropping the amount of money that's needed to create those kinds of cover stories and living those covers, those legends, right? And building that up, extra bank accounts and houses and stuff like it's not realistic, right? Sure. What you're better off with is just reducing the amount of information that bleeds out of you, right? So instead of having, your whole world on social media, right? Or you're telling everybody in the bar, this is my whole story, my whole life story, right? I can just be like, hey, my name's Boris, but if you want like a tip on how to kind of keep it separate from who you really are, for instance, like you use your middle name, right? When you go to a bar, right? Instead of your first name. So you're not lying if a cop stops you, right? Because if you get stopped by authorities somewhere and they say, well, you were telling those people your name's, Dave. It's like, okay, well, that's my middle name, Dave. Right? So I go by my middle name, right? And how the hell do they know, right? So you're not lying, because the second you give them a reason, now you're in some real trouble, right? Versus, yeah, I've been, I don't know who these guys are. That's the name I go by, and you're a policeman and I'm telling you the truth. Okay, well, there we have it, right? Versus creating this whole false kind of legends, like, okay, well, why are you going by a different name at the bar? Like completely different. Why, the bartender said you're McLovin, and that's how you signed into the hotel, but now your passport doesn't say that. So now there's something funky, and they start to get into questions as to who you are, who do you work for, all this sort of stuff. You don't want to be in that situation, unless it's like a really big deal. And like I said, 0.01% of people need to do that. Everybody else can use their middle name and speak less of themselves.
That's a great tip. Yeah, and I think that really just like you were saying, speaking less about yourself. I know personally as Americans, we have a good tendency to like talk loud and talk about ourselves a lot, but
Yeah.
at the same
Like we're
time,
here. We're
yeah,
here.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
We're the Americans over here. Yeah.
How about that steak, Joe? But
Yeah.
yeah, no, I think that really just keeping it a little bit more low key is such a great tip. Now, how about we're going into the area of like, tradecraft and blending in and stuff like that. How much of this, like you watch James Bond and Jason Bourne, how much of that stuff is kind of accurate? And then how much is really just Hollywood fiction?
I'd have to say that most of it is really simple stuff that's just done well,
Okay.
right? So like more of the technology is what's really like the spooky stuff, right? When they get some really cool technology.
Yeah.
But generally speaking, things like, you know, like surveillance detection routes and behavioral analysis and having really good situational awareness and things like dead drops or brush passes and that sort of stuff. They're all really simple techniques and none of it's like secret, right? It's all out there in the world. You can find books on it, you can find videos on it, etc. But what makes someone better at it or makes them professional at it is that they can pull those things off under any circumstances and they can do it better than the average person, right? They can do it to perfection. So just like a magician, right? So think of a magician, a really shitty one. He's trying to do something, but you can kind of see, you can see where he put the coin and all that sort of stuff, right?
Yeah.
Versus one that's an expert, and no matter how you try and dissect it, he's doing the same thing as the guy who screwed up, except he's doing it so well that he blows your mind, right? So, like a guy I know who he was with a special forces unit in the U.S. and I said, well, what kind of, this was years ago. I said, well, what makes you guys so awesome? Like you guys really have the coolest gear and stuff like that. He said, well, no, we just do the basics better than everybody else. He's like, we're experts at the basics. We can do a reload faster than your average infantry guy, and stuff like that. But really it's the basics and really good gear. And we're employed in very, unconventional ways, but the basics are what matter. So from a tradecraft situation, if you've got the basics down and you can do it blindfolded, hands behind your back, you can do it in bad situations under any circumstance, now you're talking, right? So that would be my go-to for that, is that it comes down to knowing the basic techniques, but being able to execute them under any circumstance.
So if you're a guy like me who's just really fascinated with this type of stuff and you want to become really good at it, what you're saying is learn it, look into your products certainly, and others as well. And then practice it every day a lot and you'll be good.
Yeah. And that's it. A lot of practice. And I'd say for the things that I teach and the things that I'm involved in, so the counter custody side and the covert entry side, so lock picking, lock bypassing, that sort of stuff, get a good base in it, like learn the basics, learn them well, learn them from someone who's able to teach it well, and then go forth and learn. Learn from other sources, learn from other people, get your training, get your different perspectives, right? Try it in different permutations and keep practicing, because they're all perishable skills. They're all tactile, perishable skills, just like combatives, right? If you're somebody who's fighting or doing combatives every single day, and Christmas, you're gonna be really good, because that repetition, that muscle memory, and those nuances are really gonna build up, and they're gonna increase your level of skill. Versus somebody that, I swung at a punching bag, a year ago, so I can take it. I watch a lot of UFC, and I wear a tap out t-shirt, so come get some, right? So it comes down to just constantly practicing and being aware of what your limitations are also, So just like from a combative standpoint, if you understand what your limits are with things, and you're self-aware with it, it's a little different than just going out there and looking for fights, because until you've actually understood what your limits are, you're not going to keep going to look for fights, because you're going to get your ass handed to you all the time, right? Versus only fighting when you have to. So for learning, yeah, if you want to build up that skill set, even as a hobby, get some good quality tools, get some good quality instruction, and practice. Just practice, but do so safely, especially with the counter custody stuff. Don't be, full of yourself and be like, I'm going to handcuff myself behind my back at home alone, nobody around to help me. Oh shit, I just lost the key, and now I tumbled down the stairs, and now I'm in a bad situation. You be responsible about it. Have somebody help you out. Be there with spare key, bolt cutters, able to call 911 if you have a heart attack or fall and injure yourself. Like, these are important things because they do happen. People are like, well, I can do this, but now you can't because you've never tried this before, right? So until you actually get some safe instruction, some professional instruction, and then you've tried it on your own, make sure you understand that it can be hazardous if you try it yourself. And have someone practice with you. And if you're going to do it by yourself, you want to make sure you put, ideally not by yourself, but as many safeguards in place as possible. Like, do it over Zoom with somebody. So, if you fall down or you have a heart attack, they can call the cops and paramedics for you, that sort of thing. So there's my warning to people. But yeah, practice.
No, and I think that's so key, is to put that disclaimer out there, because some people might not think about it. And it's funny you mentioned about the combatives, because you're actually echoing something that me and TJ from Kennedy Tactical were just talking about, is kind of the crawl, walk, run theory, right?
Yeah.
You really need to be able to start slow, work your way up, and then get better and better from there. Same thing with combatives, same thing with, the counter custody stuff. I would assume, and from what I've heard about the mysterious farm down in, near Langley, Virginia, or whatever,
yep.
The CIA training, they kind of do it the same way. And I would assume also that for most of the branches of the service out there, it's kind of the same thing: crawl, walk, run.
Yeah, I mean, all the training I've ever received, I always used to joke that they spoon feed you. It's like this. It's like how to take your first step when you're marching. You're learning drill, and the first thing is just this little quarter step, like, and squad one, and then back and one, and that's it. And you're sitting there, you're like, what the hell are we doing? I'm moving my foot a few inches forward and then back, and we've spent 6 hours doing this. I don't understand why we're doing this. And then you move to a full step, or the next foot moves, and it's kind of spoon fed to you, but it's done so that you do that crawl, walk, run, because by the end of a few days, you're now doing complex drill movements because you've built it up properly. Right. And even after 20 years, I'm like, when I do drill, it's so ingrained in me. Like, I know exactly what I need to do as soon as the command is called out. It's muscle memory. Like, it just happens. Right. And that's what you want. You want to be able to have that tactile feedback, and you build up that muscle memory so you kind of can't screw it up.
Sure.
Right. That's the goal, right?
Yeah, that makes complete sense. And so obviously, as a man who's been, over 20 years with the infantry and everything, we've got a lot of guys out here, both sides of the border, are really interested in becoming, all they can be on the civilian side of things. I call it like a tier 1 civilian, or a special, specially trained guy that's not necessarily currently in the service. How important do you think it is to go ahead and learn these like small unit tactics and everything versus the stuff that you're teaching, counter custody, tradecraft, that type of thing?
I guess, so to put it in in my perspective, uh, so you guys south of our border, like the American people, have a completely different take on these sorts of things.
Yeah.
Okay, we have very restrictive gun laws, and you have almost non-existent gun laws. Okay, so comparatively, um, so that's not even an option here. Okay, so when I look at it, what are we preparing for? What are you training to be? Right. Um, from an American perspective, I would say, what are you preparing for? Right? Are you preparing for a complete civil breakdown? You know, societal breakdown, revolution? What are you preparing for? Right? Or are you preparing for a blackout that's going to last a week? You know, are people likely going to be shooting one another? Now, these are solid considerations for some parts of the U.S. because, hey, I see the news too, right? And it's like, oh, you know, there's a shootout here, there's a shootout there. I have friends that live in Chicago. You know, that sort of stuff happens. But here we don't really have that same level of violent potential. Okay, we have street crime, of course, but the likelihood of having like a complete armed conflict somewhere is not really. It's like it would be a complete black swan event, right? Like even more than this pandemic. So, you know, do people want to learn that skill for a particular reason? Hey, if they just want to be kind of all they can be, and they want to feel good about their abilities, they find a sense of community in it, and they're doing it for lawful legal purposes, I'm all for it. You know, you join a club, like a gun club or something like that, and you know, you compete in shooting and whatever. If you join another group and you know, like to take long walks in the woods with a gun across your back, hey, fill your boots. Okay. But from a Canadian perspective, it's not really in the cards, right? So what I would advocate from a Canadian perspective is learn the individual skills for being able to traverse your environment confident that you can deal with a violent confrontation. Okay, whether that is the situational awareness and the behavioral analysis and social dynamics, understanding the social dynamics around you to identify a threat before it can harm you, and extricating yourself from that area, right, before it happens. That's the goal, right? Ideally, you don't want to be in a violent confrontation, because there are no absolutes as to who's going to win and how that's going to go. Second would be capable from a combative's perspective, either with or without a weapon, right? And when I say with a weapon, I'm talking about maybe, you know, a sharpened screwdriver, maybe. Like, no, you're not carrying around a Glock here in Toronto, right? And drawing it, unless you're a criminal. So so nobody's going to like be carrying it for self-defense and like draw down. It's not happening. So look at your other options. You know, will you be okay with a stick or unarmed, right? And that's generally what it's going to be, or something improvised, right? Is it going to be, you know, a pen or something like that you can use as a force multiplier to better your predicament? And then we look at kind of like building your skill sets for what happens if that didn't work well. What happens if you're assaulted and now you find you wake up and you're tied up somewhere or restrained somewhere? And what skills do you have to get your self-rescue from that kind of situation? And that, when I talk about it, that's the kind of continuum that I look at, as far as the skill sets and how they work together to keep you as safe as possible, right? And then we kind of build on those.
Well said. Well said. And I think that you're so right in that, you know, just citizens, no matter where you're from, obviously as Americans, we do have more of a gun culture out here. But, you know, even in a lot of American cities, New York City, for example, you're just not going to be walking around with a Glock. Do I think maybe you should be able to work one and load it and unload it safely, no matter where you are? Sure, that's a skill that you do. But to your point, I think that the skill sets that you guys are dealing with here, behavioral aspects, counter custody, all of that, is so much more relevant and pertinent.
Yeah, and also it it transcends, regardless of what area you're in, whether you're rural or urban. People be people, right?
Right.
You go to a wilderness area. I'm actually more afraid of people when I'm in a wilderness area than I am about the wildlife, because at least you can take reasonable steps to deal with wildlife versus a malicious intent from a person, right? And the same thing goes with the urban jungle. I'm not so concerned about many of the hazards out there. It's always going to be the people that I'm concerned with, right? Whether it's drugs, mental illness, gangs, whatever the case is, that's what you're dealing with versus am I a raccoon or a bear if you get up there, right? Because there are ways to mitigate those things versus someone who's deliberately looking to do you harm.
Now, when we talk about somebody deliberately looking to do you harm, or a group of people, even worse, what are some steps that we can take to mitigate our risk as far as being taken in the first place?
So being aware, awareness, if from a perspective of keeping a low profile as well. When I talk to groups about kind of travel safety, travel security, not putting out like you put out a certain story to the world when you walk around versus like with what you're wearing, how you carry yourself, what the story is that you project out there. And if you're wearing flashy jewelry, really dressed up nicely, driving a flashy car in an area where that is going to attract a lot of undue attention, you need to take that into account, right? That's that whole kind of gray man concept where you want to be able to just kind of, traverse the landscape without any kind of, any kind of notice, right? People can see you, but not remember you, right? That's kind of what you want, is just kind of go through the world and nobody really remembers you for anything. But if you're looking to not be a victim of, an attack or something like that, not just not looking like a good target, but also being aware of where you are and what the social dynamics are around that area and what the behavioral indicators are of person or persons that are looking to do you harm, right? Are they following you? Are they starting to kind of box you in? Are you walking down a dark alley at night by yourself? Sounds simple, but don't do that. Is this an area that's high crime rate? If you don't have to go there, don't go there, right? Okay, some people live in those areas, and that's it. But if you live in that area, then you have a better nuanced idea as to what is really threatening and what's not, right? And you start to develop a kind of spidey sense, or get the vibe of an area once you live there or once you spend a lot of time there. And even though to some people that's dangerous or there's a lot of crime that goes on there, but some people traverse that every single day and they're not victims of it because they have an understanding of how and why. But awareness is always going to be your most important thing, because if you're unaware, doesn't matter how good of a fighter you are, you bang, someone's gonna tag you, someone's gonna catch you unawares, and it won't, all your skill won't matter. So the awareness of knowing if and when something bad's going to happen and removing yourself from that situation, that's kind of your best bet for your best hope for not being a victim like that.
You mentioned about, bad neighborhoods of any country that you're in. How about seeking out a local guide or something like that to be able to bring you through that area kind of safely and give you that knowledge of, hey, go here, don't go here, do this, don't do that?
If you're able to, absolutely. Some places, is the local guide going to be the one that rips you off? Sure. That is a possibility and a consideration. However, if you happen to know somebody, or you have somebody that you trust that puts you in touch with someone else that can be that local guide, absolutely. Local knowledge is priceless, right? You can pick up a Frommer's and you can look through it, and it'll tell you, these are good areas. But a local person is going to tell you, yeah, well, it says that in the guide, but really that pizza's shit. You shouldn't go there. Go to this place here. It's not even in the guide, but it's 100% better. So, you know, so for instance, I was in Mexico a few years back with my family. We rented a car, took off into the interior a little bit and did some sightseeing. Probably not a good idea. We were stopped by like an army checkpoint, right? And, you know, drive up. We're kind of in this off the beaten path jungle road somewhere. And, you know, at gunpoint pulled out of the car. And, you know, they're respectful, but there's still guns pointed at you. So, you know, you're sitting there, you got little kids and everything. And they go through our car, they search all our stuff. You know, they ask what we're doing. We give them our passports. They're like, oh, you're tourists. Okay, thanks. Have a nice day. So they're very professional. There was no, you know, nothing bad happened. You know, everything was fine. They weren't obviously looking for Canadian tourists. But as we were let go, we kind of, the road opened up and there was some construction going on. And on the side of the road was this little taco stand. And so we pulled over, and for $5, 4 of us had 2 tacos each and a bottle of Coke. And first off, super cheap meal. Second, best food we had in Mexico the whole time. Now, I guarantee that that's a local place where the soldiers and the construction workers and locals were all eating. Okay. Definitely not on any tourist guide.
Yeah.
But it was absolutely the best food we had when we were there. So if you have a local guide, absolutely. Have access to it? Absolutely. The more trustworthy, the better. But yeah, nothing beats local knowledge.
Speaking about transport, and I know on your resume you said you worked for Transport Canada. Can you give us a little bit better of an idea for us Yankees? What is transport?
So, okay. So basically, Transport Canada is the federal department in charge of transportation and everything to do with it on a federal level in Canada. So that's aviation, marine, shipping, and rail. Okay. The highways are all provincial, like state-based, but anything federal, like those 3, because they traverse international borders and they're more responsible for international commerce. So they're regulated by the federal government. So within that, they have a security and emergency preparedness directorate that deals with those two issues. And I started out with transport doing marine security. So we were doing security checks with the Coast Guard, both U.S. Coast Guard and Canadian Coast Guard, and U.S. CBP and Homeland Security and federal and local police on the Canadian side on the Great Lakes. So for me, it was Lake Ontario, Lake Erie, and on the all the way to Montreal, I guess, along the St. Lawrence. So that was really interesting. Boarding ships, like freighters and stuff like that, and doing security checks. And then I moved to aviation security. So I was at Pearson Airport in Toronto, Canada's largest airport. And there I was responsible for overseeing the entire security apparatus at the airport. So not just me, right? I mean, my office, right? But part of that, I was a duty officer. So for the entire region, you know, you get a page and, you know, we have there's a hijacking threat or a bomb threat or something like that, security breaches, all that sort of stuff. And you deal with it. And the other side of it is you're doing, you know, daily checks and inspections all over the airport. Now, it's interesting because you guys have the TSA and the FAA, right? Transport is kind of both of those put together. Okay. So as an inspector there, it was kind of like the both American equivalents put to one, right? So one of the kind of best things that I had happen to me, or very interesting, was that we would actually have American inspectors from the TSA come up to Toronto and do inspections of American air carriers in Toronto to make sure that they're doing everything they're supposed to be doing. And I got we'd have to escort them around, you know, but we'd be paired up with people. And it was always fascinating to me because we get to talk about kind of our roles versus their roles and how it works between the two. and worked very closely with them for years. But it was always an interesting thing, because the way that they did their job, they're doing the same job, but they're doing it in a very different way from the way we do ours.
Mm,
And they also didn't they are also more security based versus security and emergency preparedness.
mm,
So one of the additional things that we had at Transport was an emergency preparedness portfolio in case something happens, like an attack or a natural disaster or something like that, and how can we carry on uh, executing our duties and maintaining a level of security under those circumstances. So it's a really dynamic situation. It was a great job. Uh, got to do a lot in all those different areas at a very high level, and um, it had a lot of experience with really kind of high profile events that you're behind the scenes on. You'd see it on the news, but nobody's talking about, well, Transport Canada did this. It's always like, well, the police did that, right?
uh,
But there's a lot of people involved in it, and at the end of the day, the way that our laws are written is that Transport had the ultimate say in the direction that event went.
hmm.
So it's either like a thumbs up or a thumbs down. Are we going to proceed this way or not? And if what was on the table was not sanctioned by Transport, then Transport shot it down and then gave an order in a different way and said, we don't like what's happening. We're going to go this way instead. And that's a very simplified way of how it went, but basically that's kind of how it went. So it was a good time there. I saw a lot, worked with some really great people, and did a lot of stuff with American, like, customs, Homeland Security, FBI, all those types of things, TSA. So it was a good go. It's a really good go. Certainly gave big perspective as to how international travel and commerce and just transportation systems all integrate into one another.
That is a fascinating background, man. And you mentioned the fact that the Americans and Canadians do things the same thing, but just differently.
Yeah.
And it's always been fascinating to me to see how the different countries do different things. And some of the ways you Canadians are very much ahead of us, and some of the ways, like being more security conscious as far as 9/11 and everything goes, the United States may have a kind of an edge there. But some could debate that. I want to ask you, being an emergency preparedness, kind of specialist here, about COVID-19 a little bit and what's transpiring right now. What are your thoughts as far as, like, right now we're all locked down. We don't really, there's a lot of misinformation going on out there, but, just from your expertise kind of level of understanding, what exactly are we looking at right now?
As far as, like, what are next steps, or what have we been dealing with?
What have we been dealing with? And I noticed that you mentioned about, even during times of emergency, taking the right steps for national security and everything like that. How have we been doing, in your opinion? I mean, as far as the Canadian side, like, how have you guys been doing? Is there anything that you maybe would have done differently if you had to do it again? And then we can go into a little bit about, where do we go from here?
So I think that in general, like, I'm pretty happy with how Canada's dealt with things. Realistically, this is seemingly a lot more deadly and virulent than previous manifestations of coronaviruses like SARS and MERS. But uh, realistically, I think everybody's eventually going to get it,
Mm-hmm.
just by its virulent nature and how quickly it's been moving through populations. Staying at home is a good thing in the sense that we're not overwhelming our medical system, but ultimately, you kind of can't stop it. It's going to be in the air. Everybody's going to get sick from it eventually, um, and I think that it's it has to be I know that our governments are now weighing, you know, do we reopen everything now or do we wait? And what's the proper timing for it? Because two things are at play. One is the economy keeps coming apart every day, right? There's only so much stimulus the government can throw in to keep people at home, right? Keep people unemployed, but still paying their mortgages, right? And getting food on the table.
Yeah.
So that's one consideration, because if you keep it going too long, there's not going to be an economy to restart, right? But on the flip side is that you also have people that are sick and tired of being stuck at home. And it's like there's, only so much that people are going to be able to take. Now been not so bad to stay home here, because we've had the shittiest weather going in Toronto. We had snow the other day. So like it's like every day, like right now it's raining and it's cold yet again. And so nobody's really motivated to go outside. But if it was, I guess, 80 degrees Fahrenheit and sunny outside, rather than like, 40 degrees and cloudy and rainy and half snowy, people don't want to go outside when it's crappy like that.
Yeah.
But as we're getting into kind of spring and summer, that's going to start to really tug at people. They're not going to want to stay home. So I know they're weighing those two things versus, do we just lift it and go forward and, roll the die and see what happens with it. So I'm pretty happy with how our government's been dealing with it, especially our provincial government here in Ontario. They've been doing a really good job. They've been trying to keep as much commerce open as possible, but at the same time, there's going to come a point where they're going to have to lift restrictions and they're going to have to let people out, and people are going to get sick, and that's kind of, it sucks, but at the end of the day, you can't stay home forever, right? You still, be vigilant, wear a mask, wash your hands, the whole physical distancing thing, keep that up while it burns its way through the population, right? And to reduce that level of that burden on the healthcare system, because right now, as people go in, they can get treatment, but if you overwhelm the healthcare system, then there's going to be people, out in the hallway needing care, and they don't get it. So I think that works really well to keep people home, so that as people are gradually released back into society, and people get sick from that, they can seek treatment, and they can get taken care of, and then they can come home and they hopefully, recover, have antibodies, and off we go.
And I think that that's another smart thing. And you're actually echoing. I had Stephen Kesting, another Canadian guy, actually on recently, jiu-jitsu, and he's been really big on this from the get-go. Is that we don't want to get it during phase one, right? Like, yes, we will all eventually probably get this.
Yeah.
But right now we don't know enough about it. They're kind of shooting in the dark as far as treatments go and everything. So if you can avoid going out and getting it, for the first 6 months, that would probably be a smart thing.
Yeah. I would agree. I mean, I've been fairly hunkered down here since kind of the beginning when they started imposing lockdowns. Like, I go to the grocery store once a week, mask and gloves, stay away from people, decontaminate when I'm home, and that's that, right? And the rest of the time I'm at home. So I think that's a really good way to go about it, because when wave 2 starts, and there's a lot of indications and a lot of people speculating that come winter, the end of this year, there's going to be a resurgence or another kind of outbreak or resurgence of the virus. So, are we going to be able to handle that new spike? And if we gradually make it towards that, or hit it gradually at a lower level, then the healthcare system won't be overwhelmed. All our logistics will remain able to function, because one of my fears at the beginning, and again, like you said, we didn't have any information about it. All we knew was people were getting sick everywhere, right? And there's a lot of fear about it. But we've maintained our level of logistical support So trucks keep going, trains keep going, ships keep going. We're still getting food into grocery stores. Our electricity's still on. Our gas comes into the house, and heats our homes. All this sort of stuff. The water keeps running. These are important things. The internet's still going. While those systems are still in place and while they're still working, we're able to maintain. But if the people who support those systems suddenly drop off, like if all the truckers in the trucking industry suddenly stop driving, we would have some serious problems within about 4 days. So we don't want to get to that. And that's why I think they're looking at keeping as many people in and only very slowly and gradually letting some people out. Because if you let everybody out, there will be spikes in infection rates and in sickness and in death, and that's going to then affect all kinds of other sectors if you just do it too quickly, right? So it's a very delicate game that they're playing. I don't have access to those kinds of reports and numbers and stuff, but on the surface, it would seem that they're doing it as prudently as possible. So all we can really do is, maintain the common sense measures of keeping ourselves healthy. And, if you're at home and you've got nothing else to do, try and keep yourself healthy, try and stay fit, try and eat as well as you can, don't be like me the other night and, crush a bag of Doritos, like try and eat healthy, stay fit, keep yourself stimulated, learn something. There's so many things that you can do to keep yourself physically and mentally stimulated and constantly learning and growing positively in this kind of time, that there's really no excuse for just, wasting away. If you've got the internet, hey man, there's countless things on YouTube, or, sign up for masterclass or something like that, or there's free things all over the place that you can learn something, ebooks, all kinds of things you can do to stay positive and grow during this period where you're kind of cooped up, right? Because there's that mental health aspect of, what do I do? I feel trapped. It's kind of like I'm, in a prison or whatever. It doesn't have to be. You can make it a positive experience, despite the fact that we don't have the option to go out and do whatever we want.
Yeah, and I fully agree. And I want to interject that even prisoners find ways out of necessity to keep themselves mentally sharp and their minds still going. I know, here in America, we got the solitary confinement. I don't know if it's that way in Canada too, but I hear some of these guys coming out and talking about just, they take apart their underwear and make a little rope or something. Various things that they have to do to keep themselves mentally going. And I think that that's so key here as well for us now, because we are kind of living like we're in a prison, a little bit nicer prison.
Yeah, it's a gold, they're gold bars, but bars nonetheless, right? And that's the thing. Like we still have a lot of freedom to do whatever we want while we're at home. So make the best of it. Try and support as many people as you can in that same endeavor. I know a lot of other veteran-run businesses that I correspond with and that I support. And everybody's been hit by this in the same way. Like, a lot of their clientele has disappeared overnight because everything they do is like their storefront or something. Right now, they've had to pivot, and being able to create that kind of community support to help one another all be successful is, I think, really important. And even my friends south of the border there, the same kind of thing, right? You can really do a lot by, share something online, give a positive comment, and just talk about being able to help one another and staying positive through everything. And that ultimately, when everybody contributes just a little bit, it helps everybody a lot.
Yeah. And I do want to touch on this, is that, you mentioned about the fact that we're doing this in a specific way to keep kind of those quote unquote frontline workers going, maintaining kind of a reserve in the background, right?
Yeah.
I'm very happy with the way that even here in the States, for the most part, federally, the way that we've been kind of handling this. Just as a first responder, I look at it from a different perspective as some people do. I don't think 5G is giving this to us, but I look at it as practically as I can, and I think I'm glad that we're handling this in the right type of way. But if this were to either keep going and maybe things started to break down a little bit, which I think we're almost clear from now, but still not out of the question. If things started to break down a little bit more, maybe food gets scarce, things like that, could you give us maybe a couple of tips that would help us, shelter in place safely, be more secure while things kind of maybe start to crumble a little bit around us?
Sure. So, I mean, again, it depends what your living situation is, right? So, if you live in a condo, you've only really got one door that you have to worry about, versus you live in a suburban home and there's all kinds of areas that someone could try and break into your house. But I think from a physical security standpoint, from a home security standpoint, being less of a target is always a good way to play it, right? So again, if you look like there's nobody home, if your house is kind of dark, you got hedges that block view from the street, that sort of stuff, and give bad guys a place to hide. You might want to reconsider doing some landscaping, right? So, lighting is good. Home security system is good. Cameras and the ability to kind of not give someone a place to hide to do bad things, right? So motion lights are a good thing. Fences that you can see through are a good thing, but that are still capable of stopping someone. Reinforce your door. Get a good lock.
Yeah.
It's one of the things that we kind of talk about when we do covert entry classes. Is we use the term craptastic. You buy a lock from Home Depot or something, and it's such crap. It's not effective in any way to actually get you stop someone from breaking in. But at the same time, for an extra $10, you can actually get something pretty good, like 10 or $20. You can go to a proper locksmith and you can buy something that has, some better tolerances, some better materials. You can rely on it a bit more. And then there's some pretty inexpensive ways to reinforce your door jambs, your door frames, that sort of stuff. And there's all kinds of different resources available online that you can just look that up, like home security hacks, or home security upgrades. That you can go for a few bucks at a hardware store and really do some nice things for your house to make it less of a target to someone walking by and casing your place. If you have a dog, put a sign out that says beware of dog. They don't necessarily know what your dog looks like. It could be a little Chihuahua like this, or it could be a massive Mastiff. But who wants to find out, right? So you add all those little bits and pieces together. There's a security system sticker in your window. There's a beware of dog sign on your steps. There's nowhere to hide because you trim down all the hedges to knee height. There's motion lights everywhere, and you've got a good lock on your door, right? At some point, someone's going to look at that and be like, risk versus reward.
Yeah.
Next door neighbor, it's all dark. I can hide behind that shrub there. I can break that window and go in. Nobody will ever see me or know the difference, right? And they don't have a dog, right? So I mean, again, there's no one size fits all answer, but when you look at kind of how someone would view your home and what makes it attractive to them, look at it like, how would a bad guy look at it? Where can I get in where nobody's going to see me? Is it dark? Is it lit? Are there people home? What other, what's my exposure, and what could I hope to gain from it? So if you've got, a big window up front, close your blinds at night so people can't look into it, those types of things. Pick up your mail. Don't announce that you're not home or something like that, so you take some of those steps to really make your house less of a likely target.
You guys are really doing some interesting things out there, and you're a man with a lot of experience that teaches a lot of cool guy stuff that's really not readily available on the market. I mean, we can all look up this stuff online, but I'm going to tell you from experience, guys, there's nothing like physically going, getting the training, because whenever you look on, online, you get half the story and half the picture. And I think, Boris, you can probably attest to that. Is there a difference between, going in person and getting that training legitimately, and then trying to look up the open source information online?
100%. So for instance, learning lock picking. One thing about that, we can watch all the videos we want, and I can talk to you about it all day. But if you don't understand what it feels like to put tension on a lock and maneuver a pick into the lock and move the pins up and down and then get it, until you've actually felt that, you're not going to understand what I'm talking about, right? You won't understand what tension is good, what tension is bad, how much is too much. What does it feel like to move a pin up and down, all that sort of stuff. You'll see it on the video and it'll be, oh yeah, well, he says it's going to be, not too much, but what does that actually mean, right? Until you've actually felt it and had someone even put their finger on your finger and say, no, you got too much. No, that's what you need. So that's for that kind of thing. There's a tactile response that makes a huge difference, right? And also being able to hold these things and having a variety of it and having someone coach you through it, right? For the counter custody stuff, again, you may be able to look it up online and say, okay, well, the guy on the screen is doing this and he's, putting this here and he's doing this. Great. But are you at home by yourself doing this? Are you putting zip ties on yourself and now trying to get out and it doesn't work? Now what do you do?
Right.
Okay. With handcuffs, it's again, a lot of the tactile sensations. Why isn't this working? Why isn't this doing this? A lot of it is the problem solving of the instructor showing you that as you learn, you're going to get bound up in some way, tripped up. This isn't working. Why isn't it working? And having someone actually work it through with you and explain it to you and show you, and you feel that difference.
Yeah.
That's something you can't get from video. But once you've come in, you've taken training, you understand what those concepts are, and you have a very solid base, that's when you start to go and explore the other avenues of knowledge, right? Because you know what that's supposed to feel like, how that's going to work. And now if you apply, let's say, restraint escapes, you know how it works on a pair of Smith & Wesson 100s, but now what's it going to be on a pair of Uzis or a pair of Russian handcuffs or whatever, right? When you start to add different manufacturers, they all have little nuances. So you understand, you have a good solid base, and now you can start to play around with that. So same thing with locks and lock picking. You understand what it's supposed to do. Now it's just more practice, and then you can play around. You can go to a store and buy a couple of locks, or you find one at a garage sale. It's like, oh, I wonder what this padlock is. Guy says he doesn't have the key for it. Hey, perfect. I get to play around with it, right? So, yeah. So that's one of those things that gives you that option, gives you that base, and then you work from there.
We'll just interject from my own perspective here too, that it's also different when you've got the adrenaline going, right? And you can probably do this firsthand, is that when you've got a hood over your head and whatever, it becomes a little bit more challenging to go ahead and deploy these tactics.
And that's the thing, like going back to the kind of crawl, walk, run, right? We don't just like put someone in there and say, hey, we're going to, do all these crazy things to you to really get your adrenaline running. And this is how you're going to learn, right? No, you're not actually going to learn anything that way. So that's why you start off in a very, calm environment where you can start to build those skills. And then once those basics are built up to a certain extent, you can start to apply little pressures or little challenges, right? So when we do covert entry concepts, we put a bunch of challenges in. So, okay, we've spent a whole day teaching you about, picking locks and doing this. Now we're going to put it under a little pressure. We're going to, play a little game. You can win a patch, you can do all kinds of stuff. We keep it fun, but at the same time, there's a time limit. There's, you're up against other people, we do a couple other fun things, and, but the pressure is real, right? The stressors are real, and, it's safe, but we make it challenging like that. And same thing goes with the restraint escape stuff. So once we start to add restraints on top of restraints, and then do it in a time limit and that sort of thing, or handcuff you to somebody else, or you're trying to get out before somebody else, you have some little challenges and stuff like that. And then you can go beyond that. And it's like, you can put a hood on, you pour water over them or whatever, and you can start to build it up from there, and increase that stress level. So you have all kinds of options with it, but you're right. Get some real training, hands-on, learn the skill sets, and then start to jazz it up beyond that, right? But get the basics down first.
So before we're out of time here, man, I just want to ask one more question. Is that,
Shoot.
Would it be important to go ahead and redo a course, or take more further kind of advanced training once you get the basics here in one course? I like to go ahead and take a course 2-3 times if I'm able to.
I'm with you 100% on that. I've taken some courses a few times, just because regardless of the course, and one thing with the Army, like when you go and like you do yearly, your yearly qualifications and stuff like that, I approach it all, whether I've been doing it for years and years and years, or if it's the first time I'm doing something. And I have the same approach as if I know nothing about it. And I go in, and even though I know the stuff back to front, I approach it in the same way. Teach me as if I know absolutely nothing, and I want to learn the basics again, because that allows you to shed a lot of the those bad habits you may have developed, right? Or maybe the nuances that you forgot about when you first learned it, and to reinforce the good habits that you should have. So everything from lock picking, like when I put on covert entry concepts here in Toronto, as we're teaching it, the important thing is I'm teaching people the way that they should be learning, but that also reinforces the way that I should be doing it too. So the same thing goes with counter custody work. If I'm teaching the basics, this is how this is done. These are the best practices. It reinforces those things in my mind too, right? So when I go and take a course, something a bit more advanced, or something in an area that I may not know too much about, it's going to be the same thing. As if I know nothing, I want to learn, and I want to continue learning. And I think it's important that if someone's wanting to get into this or any other field, having that teachable mentality to be able to go learn those basics, and then constantly learn, like constantly have that student mindset, because I don't like people when they say to me, "Oh, you're an expert in." I'm not. I specialize in certain things, but I'm not an expert, and I don't think I'll ever want to be an expert. I want to be a student of, and I want to constantly keep learning about it, even if it's just the basics, because I want to be really, really, really good at those basics, and that's what makes you like expert level. But it's one of those like chasing the dragon type thing. You want to constantly be seeking to improve, to be better than you were the day before. So for anyone looking to do that, start with a basic course, take it a few times if you're able to, and then move on to advanced stuff, or do a basic, do an advanced, come back to a basic to reconfirm everything you knew, and just go from there, and take it from different suppliers, different sources, different instructors and stuff like that, because you're always going to learn something. Even if you do the same course 3 times, it's never going to be the exact same thing, right? You're always going to pick something up, like some new iteration, or some student is going to say something that nobody ever thought about. Like there's all kinds of variables that come into play that you'll learn from it, and you'll come away with something positive from it.
Every single time I interview someone like you, whether it's special forces guy, a guy like yourself with the, counter custody, special secret squirrel type stuff, they always say the same type of thing: is never stop learning. You're always going to be a student, and the day that you think you're a master, you're an asshole. So
yeah,
I think that's really, really good advice to kind of leave us with. Now, one last thing I want to ask you, man, is how can guys get in touch with you? I know right now everything kind of shut down, but when things start opening up again, where should we be looking for courses or notifications about when you guys are going to get going again?
So my primary social media platform is Instagram. So at True North Tradecraft, you can give us a follow there. Basically, that's the most up-to-date kind of posting stuff, because almost every day something's being posted. When we have updates or whatever, that's always going to come out there first, but it'll also be on the blog of the website. On the website store, if you look under workshops, you'll see kind of what's coming up and available. Now, all that's been kind of like shelved because of COVID. Yeah. But once all the restrictions are lifted and the border is reopened, we're going to be looking at when can we reschedule it for. So we're going to have covert entry concepts, hopefully in the fall here in Toronto. We have myself and TJ Kennedy from Kennedy Tactical. We have the Greyman Security Conference that's still scheduled for the late October. Right. So it'll be here in Toronto. So 3 days of a big mix of training, various types. So you can go to greymansecurity.com or you can Greyman Security on Instagram as well. I have some joint stuff coming up with both Kennedy Tactical and Ace from Delta 2 Alpha Design. There's a bunch of other things that'll be coming up. We had a urban escape and evasion actually that we were going to launch this summer, but that's not going to happen now because of the way that the lockdown is gone. But we're looking at when is the date that we're going to be able to reschedule it for. But that would be the idea was going to be like a Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and we'd be spending the days running around Toronto doing some cool stuff. And then beyond that, we're working on a bunch of stuff, but it's all been delayed. But stay tuned to the Instagram. You can look at the Facebook page as well, but pretty much everything from Instagram just gets posted there. So whatever your platform of choice is. And you can reach out through Instagram or info@truenorthtradecraft.ca if you want to email me directly. And just keep an eye out for upcoming things. We're looking to spend some time with you guys down in the States. But again, the 2 dates I had totally shelved because the borders closed. So as soon as that's opened up, we'll start putting some updates out there and going from there.
Come on, use your infiltration, man. Sneak over here and teach us some stuff. So I want to encourage you guys also. I'm going to be trying to put these on the books as soon as they're announced for me personally. Maybe we'll get down there and do some in-person stuff. But you guys can also follow me on Gutter Fighting Secrets Instagram, and I'll be reposting your guys' schedule, at least when I'm going to be able to get out there. So
that's awesome.
Definitely look up Boris, and we will also all, I'm sure, hopefully meet up one day soon. So
looking forward to it.
Boris, I really appreciate you coming on. True North Tradecraft is really a very cool company, and I'm excited for everything that you guys have coming down the line. And I really appreciate your time. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to having you up here in Toronto and doing some really cool shit. So
likewise, man.
Thank you so much, and stay healthy and stay crafty, eh?
Will do, man. So I think you guys know what's coming, but I want to reiterate, please remember, until next time, that you are your first and last line of defense, and I will catch you on the next tactical podcast. Boris, thank you again, man.
Cheers.